that old man got the tractor beam out of commission, or this is going to be a real short trip. Okay, hit
it! Hey there, everyone. How's it going? We have just a kind of an impromptu show. We kind of just talked about this last night, right, Jason? We planned this last night.
Yeah, well, me and Richard talked about it earlier in the week, and then me and you kind of worked out what time would be best. And
yeah, we got a special guest, Richard Fairbrother. I guess your nickname is Mookie. I'm learning that first thing that you just showed up.
Yep.
Co-founder of the Rebel Legion, which I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about. I know that it's rebel costumes, right?
it's basically the good guys costuming versus the 501st. So it's
right.
It's just,
Okay.
just to make it easier. Yeah.
Right. And so we're gonna talk about rebel costumes, a little bit about yourself, and also guess we'll get into some found part stuff, right?
Yeah.
And, just have a good little chat. But so what's with the name Mookie?
So there used to be a stuffed Ewok doll called Mookie, and it had two E's. And my very first Dragon Con, it was my very first convention ever, and it was Dragon Con. So it was like one of the best cons to quote unquote pop your cherry on. And I met a girl at the Atlanta airport who had this stuffed Ewok. And being all things rebel, I was like, that's awesome. I'm going to borrow him. She didn't know me. I didn't know her. And the whole con, I ran around with this stuffed Ewok doll, and we took pictures of it, like passed out by beer bottles, eating pizza. Everywhere I went, it went. And I didn't meet up with her again until like the third day, but everybody had heard about this guy that borrowed her Ewok. And that my nickname became Mookie with two E's until we found out that was a female Ewok, and then we changed it to one E, and it's been Mookie ever since.
Nice.
So
That's interesting. That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did give it back, and then a year later, some friends bought me my own stuffed Ewok. So
nice. So you're the co-founder of the Rebel Legion. Do you want to tell us a little bit about when, how, and where it all started?
Yeah, I originally had gotten involved in a group that was all things Rebel pilots, the Dewback Wing, and it was really strictly only pilots. And at the time, I was really a big fan of Hoth commandos on the Rebel side. So my appeal to Star Wars was I always wanted a Rebel pilot costume because I love orange. And everything I like is A New Hope. I'll get that out of the way, or original trilogy. I'll get that out of the way now. And it really was not going to focus on the other stuff. So I ended up, the guy who ran it, Frank, Mara Dave's father, said, well, there's this other guy, Tony, who's all about all the Rebel costumes. So you should go talk to him. So I talked to Tony, and Tony was like, yeah, I have this idea. I want to be like the 501st, but for the good guys. But he needed some help because it's a big undertaking. God bless Albin. How he got the 501st to where it is today is an amazing story, and rightfully so. So I talked to Tony, and Tony's like, all right, would you do it with me? And I'm like, absolutely. And from there, we just decided I recruited probably the first 7 members. I know there was Brandy. All right, Benjamin, you calm down. Brandy, who did the Hoth, Princess Leia, she was an amazing costumer in her own right. We had Lynn Duffield, Mal Walker, who's Mon Mothma, who like dead nuts on for Mal Mothma. She's a big costumer. We had.
I'm sorry. Is this the picture that you sent me? Is this like?
Well, that was taken in Indianapolis. That was Star Wars Celebration 2. And yeah, so Lynn is on the right of the picture. I'm in the Hoth Rebel costume in Indianapolis in the summertime. Jason Gallo, Darth Goat, was the Rebel pilot. And then Matt Fingston, who was our graphics and web guy, was the Jedi. And that was really kind of where we started. Tony Tony had a lot going on in his life, and he was never in the forefront. And I don't know if, I mean, I know people know of Tony, and he is really he was the original idea of it. So we just kind of took it and ran with it. And we went, and by the way, there's my stuffed Ewok down on the steps that I had gotten. So, I mean, we started out with like 7 people, and then people would email us and say, I want to be a part of it. We had boards. And, you know, it was, I talked to Albin a couple times because there was a bit of, the 501st was starting to explode, and it was very difficult to try to show up to the same things that the 501st was showing up, because they were getting a lot of attention. They were great costumes out of the gate. And it's a lot. Making a costume is difficult. The consistency and the speed at which you can make Imperial costumes is a lot different than what you can do for Rebels. There are a lot of disadvantages being hero characters, because you basically don't have buckets that cover everything ever.
Right.
Unless you're C-3PO or R2-D2. And so,
Richard,
anyway,
is it okay for me to interject? I wanted to just discuss a little bit about what we talked about the other night. I didn't mean to cut you out so harshly, but I found it really interesting. And Chris, you might, like, certain things I didn't take into consideration. So when he was teaching me a little bit about the Rebel Legion, 2 of the things that I found the most interesting was, 1, you have to you don't have to look exactly like the character, right? But if you take it on a character that has specific features like black hair or, you know, sort of dark eyes or something like that, and you have bright blonde, you know, light blonde hair and bright blue eyes, you can still do the character, but you're not really embodying it the same way. So it leads a little bit of a limitation as to who you can select and how, or, you know, you're coming down to sort of like the nitpicking and the gripes of the character and the costume. But also, as Richard was just mentioning, when you're doing armor such as like Stormtrooper armor or Scout Trooper armor, it's not to say that isn't difficult, because everybody's a different size, so you have to trim and cut. But at the end of the day, when you're actually producing the armor itself, it's rinse and repeat. But when you're doing actual clothing costumes, it's like, you know, 5 groomsmen all going in for a tux, and every single one needs to be sized up and, you know, measurements taken. And so I feel like there's so much more work that goes into taking on and embodying that character. And another thing, and this is biased for me, but you always presume that, like, oh, an AT-AT or a Scout Trooper or a TIE Fighter, because the bad guys, let's say, I mean, we can all admit it, even if you're on the side of the good guys, they just have a cooler looking aesthetic 90% of the time. No matter what license you're looking at, even outside of Star Wars, they're just cooler looking. But you have people like our colleague and co-host Matt, who's more of a Jedi guy, who's more of a good guys type of guy. So you don't realize, like, it's such a great way to fill that niche of people who want to portray, you know, the rebels, like the good guys. But at the same time, you're not realizing how many limitations you're being presented with, or maybe even like some time restraints. You can't just like have a costume made up in a couple weeks or a couple months. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer, especially if you have a lot of people interested in the same thing. So I took that as,
Plus, there's not an RS that's going to build them for you.
There's not somebody that's going to bust them out. Yeah.
And we live, and I've said this to Jason, but we live in amazing times right now. But back in 2001, when we really started, and to Jason's point, you'd have one seamstress working on one costume, where there were guys in the garage that could vacuum form, you know, 10 to 20 pulls of armor. And, you know, you'd do 20 chest pieces and then have to move on to a shoulder bell, or, you know, the forearm or the knee, Sand Trooper sniper knee. But that went magnitudes of an order faster in production for the parts that you needed, versus us. You know, one flak vest took as long as probably making armor, and nobody was doing multiples of flak vests, because there wasn't like there was not an organizational mechanism to say, okay, everybody who wants to be a Rebel pilot, these are accurate flak vests as much as we can know them. Order all of them through this one person, and within 2 months they'll be done. You know, when in a day you could pull 10 things of armor, and it would take 10 days just to make one flak vest, let alone 20 of them. So those are just some, you know, the Rebels have always had it harder. Maybe it's part of the, I mean, same as in the movies. And it takes nothing away from the 501st. That's not the point. But boy, it was rough times back then, but it was really a lot of fun times. And you mentioned found parts in that picture. That's actually the Simrad LP7 that I'm wearing as the Hoth Binoc. So that's about as accurate as you can get. And that's a fun story. The Rebel pilots had mics that I used to work at a telecommunications company doing inside sales, and whenever a microphone would break, the headset, I'd be like, "Can I buy that for $10?" I said, "Yeah." I'd ship it to Richie's Armor, and there was an accurate Jedi microphone or headset for the Rebel pilots.
Nice.
But it was an actual one too, not just like a resin cast one. It was, you had an
No,
actual.
the actual
Yeah.
Plantronics. They were like $110 new, and we had 200 people in the telecommunications firm, and I would run around. I was like, "Is yours broken? Is yours broken?" And I was kind of like the Jawa of broken headsets. So
okay. So I know from the 501st that there's certain looks that have to, this armor has to be this way and this helmet has to be that way. I'm assuming there's just kind of the same thing with the Rebel Legion too, isn't there? Like it's like they have pilots have to have this kind of
meet or exceed a certain requirement or prerequisite.
Yeah,
there is now, but back in the beginning, there wasn't, and for a long time there wasn't, because for number one, we were concentrating really on getting members and just
growing numbers. Okay.
Yeah, and
not so strict.
That's no, and we were more individualistic in terms of people had purple Jedi robes, people had pink Jedi robes. My personal belief is goes along with what Jason said, is like, if you're going to be the character, be the character. You better be accurate. In some universe, are there purple Jedi robes? Probably, but back then it was more of a, how can we grow and do it?
Just have fun, maybe.
Just have fun as best we can and get our numbers up. And there was a lot of internal pressure. Like Seattle Star Wars Society wanted to run the Pacific Northwest base, but it was going to be like the Rebel Legion underneath Seattle Star Wars Society. And I was like, no, it's the Rebel Legion as the Pacific Northwest. I think that was Endor base because it made sense with all the trees.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And I picked Echo Base for our region because I was such an Empire fan and a Hoth fan that, as a co-founder, I'm Echo Base.
Right. And you're up in New York, right?
Yeah, Rochester.
Okay.
So, back when we first started, we did everything we could to get members. Now, ultimately, in line with that, my best friend Ken and I, who's in the picture later that we'll see, I would assume with George,
we'll get to that. Well, I'll put that up when we get to that story.
Yeah, we went to the Magic and Myth, and I remember we took, I don't know how many pictures of like the back side of the X-Wing pilot, the front side of the flak vest, and we literally in Photoshop would place arrows counting how many ribs are on the pilot flak vest, because none of them were really accurate at the time.
Right.
And then I remember doing an Adobe Illustrator file of all the Rebel chest boxes, because Zev Sinesca's uses green and red. The squares, Luke's are blue and white, Wedges are green and something, and where the striping and piping is different, even though they're all made of the same parts. A lot of what you saw in, the Rebel chest boxes were very unique and very different to each pilot. So I remember going through that and, doing an Illustrator file. So there was a focus on being accurate, and there was a focus on being, a good representation of your character, but but we didn't have standards as like, we're going to kick anybody out.
Yeah, especially as you're trying to grow numbers. And this was, I would assume, well before the time of like all the books and chronicles and all the details and being able to just go into Google and find high resolution reference photos. I mean, you guys are kind of doing things from square one. We're talking about decades, right?
I had the visual dictionary, whatever magazine and print stuff of pictures. I remember the Magic and Myth actually had one of the best images of the one bearded Hoth Rebel trooper like firing whatever that torpedo cannon looks like, but it showed an image of the patch, his rank
The
on his
little
shoulder.
comm link, yeah.
Right. And it wasn't,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until like the Costumes of Star Wars that you actually saw a close-up detail of that. But we recreated that as best we could in my costume. So we really did do what we could with the limited resources we had. And we had a lot of help. Like we had a lot of shadow friends. One of them actually, I won't mention his name. He knows who he is, Mr. Thumb. But he's been, he'll slide me pictures, say, don't show this, but here's what you're looking for. Be
nice.
accurate. And it's, a lot of it's collecting, as you guys know, is a lot about relationships. And if you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, out of the blue, you'll get help. And it really, I've had Lucasfilm images that have never been published. And I've never sent them anywhere because these are for you, be more accurate, help other people, but don't say who they came from and don't, but
it's really important to make as many like positive relationships as you can. That's more important. That sometimes is more important than having as much money as you want to buy whatever you want. So like sometimes you just can't get things unless you make those relationships with people that,
Yep. And we had a blast. Back then we had a blast. Like for example, the Hoth binoculars, that's, my other job was right after that was selling open market bid items to the government through a big company. So I was used to finding things that couldn't really be found, never taking no for an answer because, for example, I had to find, this was in 2000, I had to find a Jazz drive for NASA because all their data for the Pegasus reentry vehicle was stored on Jazz drives. And if they didn't have one, they would lose all of their data from the last reentry of the rocket. So Jazz drives were discontinued in 93. It's now 2000. I had to find, and this is like, this actually, the searches on the internet were way more accurate back then because there weren't like billions of stuff to go through. Yeah. But I had to find a company somewhere that actually had a purple and a gray one still in plastic. And NASA's like, well, we can't have purple. So they'll take the gray one. But there were two left. So when it came to like being accurate, the Hoth binoculars are based off the Simrad LP7, which is a laser rangefinder. It's but it's protected Department of Defense technology. So I ended up calling Simrad and was like, hey, do you have any broken ones? And they're like, yeah, you're not, what do you need it for? And I told them, and I said, and they were like, that's nice, but you're not allowed to have it. Because even broken ones were, you're not allowed, it's like restricted government military stuff. So then I ended up calling the rep at the time for Simrad. I found the US rep and I called him. I said, hey, listen, here's what I'm trying to do. I just need it for costuming stuff. Do you have any broken ones? He said, well, we're not allowed to sell the broken ones, but I can sell you the shell of an actual one that can't have guts in it. And we use it to carry around to show people how heavy it is and how, what it's like. And he happened to be flying back to the States and he goes, I'll grab one from the factory. I'll bring it back. Here's what it costs you. Don't say anybody, don't tell anybody who you got it from, but good luck. And I remember getting it. We went to Pittsburgh Comic-Con and it was sitting on a table and like 4 people in the whole place other than Jason Gallo, myself, and Matt Fingston and Doug Fesco knew what it was. Like 4 people out of I don't know how many thousands. And they're like, is that like the Sand Trooper? No, it's the Hoth ones. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. No, everybody else thought I was G.I. Joe, right? Because you have olive drab. They're olive drab. So, and then I sent it to Richie's Armor. He molded it and cast it and sold 20. And, he ended up doing the conversion and I got that because I allowed him to, make the molds and sell them. And that was, but I was the first one with an accurate, as accurate as we could get at the time, the binocular.
So is it this one that you have in the picture here?
Yeah, that's an actual Simrad LP7 shell. That's not a mold. That's the actual thing. Now, funny story about accuracy. When we got to Celebration 2, we had that was another thing. We had a Rebel Legion table for the first time, and it was in a room with a bunch of props on the table. And I remember getting called back to the table. I had left to go down and look at. They had a display, and there was supposed to be an A-wing pilot helmet, but it turned out to be a Y-wing, and I was so disappointed. Little did I know, I really loved the Y-wing as well. But Don Bees was like, "Where'd you get this?" And Don Bees, did R2D2. He was the motor operator and did a lot of work on R2D2, and then he ended up running the archives in subsequent years after the trilogy come out and things. And I'm like, well, it's a Simrad LP7. He's like, no, where did you get it? And I was like, and I started telling him the story of how I got it. He's like, well, he goes, all right, you seem to know what you're doing, but I walk over those every day. I like step over them all the time at the archives. And I thought somehow you stole one. And it was like, yeah, I wish I knew. That'd be even better. But
yeah,
in the quest for accuracy and stuff, when you do your job right, those are the kind of fun stories that you're like, yeah, man, when Don Bees thinks you stole it from the archives, it's job well done.
Should just ask them, hey, can I have a couple of the ones that you're just stepping over top of?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the two contributing factors is, one, he knows that civilians aren't supposed to have them, and then two, right. You have an accurate one, so it's that balance of between the two. One thing I will say is, like, I've always been a little bit distant from the whole cosplay thing because I never really got into it and never really.
Be careful because we don't call it cosplay; we call it costuming.
Okay, costuming.
But we don't LARP in our. I mean, some people might, but I've never LARPed in the snow. I mean, I've worn my hat gear out in the snow, but never the rest of it. Anyway,
I guess I better change my description on the YouTube advertisement from.
Well, this is a perfect example. This is a perfect example of what I was leading to. So my ignorance behind it and not understanding the community and what is actually involved. It wasn't until recent where I started building, actually working on a couple different helmets and parts and assembling busts, right, from the waist up, that I realized, like, wow, this is more than just, suiting up and doing so. Like, there's so much work. And then when you're wearing this piece physically, you become a steward of this piece. You have to take care of it. And like a vehicle, there's maintenance and there's upkeep and there's all these aspects that go into it that you kind of take for granted when you go to these, whether you're at Celebration or a con and you see people dressed up, you take it for granted and you don't realize the amount of work that goes into it. But to follow up with that on even more so is that you don't realize, one, how uncomfortable or how hot or how heavy that some of these outfits really are. Like, I had something I was just playing around with the other day. I was really, really curious. I got something really interesting in the other day, and I was really curious. I was like, wow, this thing is so crudely made, but it was made exactly as you would have seen on set. And I was like, this couldn't have been comfortable. So I threw it on just for the novelty of it. And I thought to myself, after a few seconds, I had to take it off. I had that, like, get me out of this thing feeling. And I just thought to myself, like, wow, my hat really goes off to one, not only the actors, but the people who do the actual costuming, especially if you're.
I felt that way when I was wearing the snowtrooper.
The snowtrooper, like,
awful.
Well, you can't.
This is such a newfound respect. I really do.
Well, it's interesting because the wear and tear that goes in the costumes. For example, how many times have you picked up and put on that helmet behind you, Chris? Any of the helmets?
Well, I wore the biker scout a lot because I couldn't wear. I for Halloween I went as my snowtrooper and I couldn't wear that helmet whatsoever. Right. So I put on the biker scout. But yeah, I can't imagine walking around with any of those helmets on.
But picture like bumping your knee, tripping, dropping something.
There are guys and gals with 100 troops, and they're constantly and the buckets are so small you got to go sideways. So there is an appreciation, but that, for me, that was part of the fun. Like, this drive for accuracy. I might have had 13 photos of Hoth Rebel stuff, and from that I figured out how to disassemble and reverse engineer all of the stuff. And one was from a photo of like a Rebel commander standing in front of one of the Rebel transports, and you could see 3 clips on the back where the backpack, Alice pack went, the A-frame. Another one was, I noticed that all the Hoth jackets had hoods. You really don't see them because they're hidden either by the hat or the scarves. But there is a scene in Empire when Luke is out of the back of the tank and it's red, that there are 3 coats hanging up on the wall. And I'm like, it was in front of me the whole time. Yet until I figured that out, nobody knew they had hoods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was, and those, it's the same thing. At the same time, you had the RPF discovering all sorts of things about props and greeblies and files. I mean, it was just this era of like eureka moments and enlightenment. And it'll probably be hard to capture that again. But the good news is, like today, you have people like RS Prop Masters who, okay, they have the molds, they have a lineage piece, they have. If you want accurate, there's nothing more accurate.
Right. Yeah. I get such a thrill when I figure out. I mean, I'm sure other people figure out these greeblies for studio scale models, but when I figure out something on my own, and that without any help, it's exhilarating. Like
it's a rush.
Oh, it's so exciting, and I call up Jason. I'm like, listen to this. This is from this and this and this, and probably 100 million. It's probably very well known, but.
And then we spend how many hours like dissecting and reverse engineering? Like, well, it's going to be this because the shadow's this way and this is placed that way. But it's a rush. It's a lot of fun.
Is it a seam? Is it a shadow, or is it paint?
Yeah, exactly.
Like there was an advanced book that we got from for the Phantom Menace, and somehow you could see the inside of Obi-Wan's robes, and it was silk lined, but the hem started like this far from the actual edges of the sleeve. So unless you saw that actual image with his arm like this, you would never know that it was silk lined. So there's these little things that if you look long enough and you look hard enough and you kind of know what to look for, like you said, it's, and the sad thing is, being a Hoth Rebel guy, like I think there were 3 people in the world that cared about the Hoth Rebel soldier and how many variants, how many different blasters they had. But it's kind of like, dude, they have hoods. Everybody, they have hoods. And like 3 people are like, yeah, you find something about Vader's Graflex and people are like losing their minds, like the whole RPF. Oh my God. And then there's, well, I found it 10 years ago or whatever. But
question for you, is that the casing for the binoculars, the Hoth binoculars, is that still extremely hard to come by?
Well, I don't know. Although I will say, I think it was on a hyperdrive today. Somebody goes, "Hey, look, I just got my Simrad LP7.
I just saw that. A few change hands from time to time, but they're pricey.
I can't imagine. Like that's like seeing like your kid born again, and it was, because back then it was like the one thing that nobody else had,
right?
And in my career of like costuming and prop collecting, and now I'm really starting my real prop collection. But it's like I've been really lucky to have some unique pieces. Like one of them was an Endor Rebel commando rifle, screen used. It was one of the ones that used blanks. And I remember just getting a AOL instant message out of the blue, like, "Hey, Brandon Ellinger wants to talk to you. There's one of 3 ones built by Sid Stembridge, and he wants to know if you want it." And I'm like, "Yeah, man," because like that's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And then it's $2,500, and in 2000, that's like, well, that's my car.
Yeah, that was expensive back then.
But, yeah, and so I don't remember what the Simrad cost. And even if it was just a shell, I think I think the one that was recently, I don't remember what it was, but it was over $1,000, and it was just like back then. That's a steep fee, but it was such a unique piece, and I got so much joy out of it that is looking at your collection, some things are worth it.
Yeah.
Some things like that. Like I don't get into found parts that much. I get into studio scale, but there are a few things like the Hoth binoculars that I find very attractive. Definitely, for sure.
No, it's a piece that I love. I don't know why I'm so taken by it. I like the aesthetic of it. When Han's out looking for Luke on the Tauntaun.
Yeah, the scanner. The radio scanner.
And I did so much research on that and was able to compile a whole list, not myself, but through the work of many members in the RPF and researching what the research they had done. And I had a whole list of it. And I actually started, accumulating some of those parts. But man, it is such a complicated piece because they use some of the most obscure and rare and arbitrary pieces. And it's like every time there's something that was manufactured or produced, like let's say they produce this cap. And let's say for every 1,000, there was like one black one. Of course, they used the black one and not the 900 red ones. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It's just been one of those things where, so when I saw those binoculars, the same ones you saw, someone had them in the original green,
Yep.
untouched at the time. They must have just acquired them. I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, like what a score, because to have the original piece and be able to like to put that into your collection, whether you touch it and leave it as is, or you paint it and make it what it was as a prop, it really fascinates me.
Is this it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep. And I
Yeah.
remember seeing those at the Magic and Myth, and you could never get to the backside of certain stuff at the Magic and Myth, and it was always a
Yes,
bummer.
it's always the thing is you can't see behind on some of them.
That is a cool piece.
Yep.
That's a
And
fantastic one.
yeah, production techniques, today versus what we had back in 2000, even on the 501st and the armor side, so much better than what we had back then.
And
Is
this
this
is
pretty accurate?
basically this looks yeah, it looks pretty accurate from what I could tell. So Chris, you know the part that you get for the snow trooper that goes in the belt?
Yeah.
You
The
have one of those
dishwasher.
slapped on it. Yep, you have one of those slapped on it. A bunch of different. There's a bunch, but even the two pieces that connect together, were they like Swedish hand washers or something from like a bathroom or hand sanitizer things? They would hang in the bathrooms. So they took two of the shells of those and cupped them together. And
That's pretty
there's
cool.
I think there's like one or two parts that still haven't been identified, but it's about 90% identified at this point. And I think Super Green Props, the one who's making the kits for the Death Star detention camera, had just actually finished a couple of the metal greebly parts for this as well. So yeah, it's a fantastic piece.
Well, it's actually funny because in Rochester, New York, the Graflex was made in Rochester, New York, and a lot of them have a stamp on the bottom. And somebody, my best friend, pointed out, he's like, "Yeah, I was on a board, and somebody was complaining that why is there a Rochester, New York in Star Wars?" And it's on the bottom of the Graflex, and it's like,
Was made, yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And it's funny, there were Phillips head screws on that one piece you just showed, Chris, and
Yeah.
everybody's up in arms about Rey having a Phillips head on her lightsaber in Star Wars, or their
Yeah, I'm sure
staff.
there's a lot of parts
It's just
of
like,
Star Wars that
who
have Phillips
cares?
head screwdrivers.
Right. And
Right.
people want to, they want to believe it was every single part was made up just to be a.
What's the
something
difference
future-
between a Phillips and an Allen screw? Like an Allen head screw.
Yeah.
There's no difference. There's a flathead right
Well,
there. So
For accuracy, there is. If you were supposed to have an Allen head, you better have it.
yeah. But I'm saying like,
Right.
why would people complain about a Phillips head and not complain about an Allen?
It's not like they're going to get a die and cast 2,000 pieces from
Right.
a plant somewhere just to make you've never seen this type of screw head before.
That's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too about that, what a lot of people don't realize, I mean, some obviously there's a large product community that does, but what some don't is until Raiders of the Lost Ark, we always take when we hear the Lucas archives or the archives in general, we immediately think Star Wars, but it wasn't until Raiders of the Lost Ark and then going into ESP and Return of the Jedi that the archives really started to document and actually save things because nobody, including Lucas, expected Star Wars to become what it became. So everything was done on such a tight shoestring budget that the props were all, bespoke, makeshift. And then the ones that they did get in from like prop houses, whether they were weapons or guns, or a lot of those got dismantled and sent back, or, resources were reused. And people don't realize that. And I think that's for the OT collectors, especially those that are specific to A New Hope. Like if you look at a Vader helmet, A New Hope, there was, the one until they cast more for touring and whatnot. But for the 11 minutes of screen time, I think there was just the one, maybe two. I could be incorrect, so any Vader fans, feel free to correct me. But when you got to ESB, you had multiple helmets plus the stunt ones. Return of the Jedi, you had a whole handful. Troopers, multiple hero stunt, etc. So there was a lot of things that everybody's like, well, where's this piece exist? Where's that piece exist? A lot of people just assume it's in the archives. Surprisingly, a lot of things from the original movie are in private collections. And again, it wasn't until you started getting into Raiders of the Lost Ark, ESP, Return of the Jedi, that you'll see a lot of those pieces actually in the archives and or documented. But a lot of the A New Hope stuff just kind of,
Yep.
Pretty cool.
I remember that.
These are so badass. I just love, it's one of those things where everything about the aesthetic of Star Wars, and everybody can agree with me, right? It's not just because I'm a fan. It just has the right look. It doesn't have that Someone made a comment the other day. It was really interesting. There's a picture of Vader, and it said, "Do you think young people today look at this and see it as outdated based on the amount of time that had passed?" And what they did that made it interesting was they posted a picture of a movie that was 45 years prior to Star Wars and showed like a spacesuit. And of course, I looked at it and I was like, "That's so goofy and silly, right?" But
Mhm.
and again, I'm not trying to be biased, and you guys yourselves, correct me if I'm wrong. I just feel like when I watch Star Wars, I feel like still 45, 50 years later, it holds up today. The aesthetic, stylistically, the approach, the way things were made, from the props to the costumes. I mean, there's a very few things that are a little like, okay, that was, circa 1970, 1980. But for the most part, I think stylistically, these things still hold up today, and they don't look silly or look for like from an old movie. And that's what the draw is. That's what I really like about it.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, that's even more than I paid for the one that I got. If I remember, I think I paid $1,500 for mine back in the day. But I can tell you, part of that goes to what Lucas created, and the magic of it was the lived-in universe, where
Mhm.
you didn't have one prop that seemed out of place because nothing else was like it. Everything in that universe of Star Wars, at least in the original trilogy, to me, well, because they were all real props, right? The sets were real. There was very little CGI as we know it today. Well, there was no computer generated CGI, really. But they did such a good job of like everything had a place and everything was used. Like,
Hmm.
they used they used the binoculars. Han Solo used the scanner. They used their weapons. In fact, the only thing you don't really ever see, I think, is like the Endor commando rifle and Jedi being shot by an Endor commando. I think there maybe one blast, but they never really fire them. But it, back then they made everything and everything had a purpose.
Mhm.
Yeah, it did. Everything fit in very well and sort of
I
came
think
together.
I think subconsciously, like you may not think this, you know, but subconsciously you see these binoculars that have real world parts to them, and even though they're cobbled together and they don't look like the plumber's, whatever tube or whatever it is that you're looking at, in your mind you're looking at this thing and it just looks like it really is a real world object,
Right.
outside of like a Star Trek's, uh,
Phaser.
phaser. You know what I mean? It's totally different,
Or the
Well,
So,
tricorder. Yeah.
but that's a really good point, Chris. If you look at something like Buck Rogers or Star Trek or even
mhm.
Aliens, right? I mean, Aliens not. I mean, some things look cool,
Well,
but
aliens
you
not
have
so much.
not so much, but like, or maybe Predator, but you have these things that they look like props. They're sort of make pretend, but in Star Wars, it's like, oh, that's something that you think is okay. I
Could
could
be
use
used.
this in the real world, yeah.
Yep.
And that comes from the genius of Roger Christensen of taking these real world parts and and many other people, but converting them and then L Street and making things that are like, okay, this does exist in our world. We just revise it ever so to make it a prop for the movie. But it really does fascinate me. And like I said, learning about the costuming and the Rebel Legion, the 501st, I really do have a newfound respect, especially as it spills its way over to, making and building things because you're not just using it as a display piece, you're making something that's actually functional. And the functionality of it, I didn't take into consideration like even the maintenance as we talked about. If you bump into something, if you crack a knee plate, if you lose 10 pounds, if you gain 10 pounds, if you drop something, it's just so much stuff. It's a lot of care and a lot of time, and it really becomes a whole sort of hobby in and of itself, a whole world in and of itself.
Yep.
Yep.
Suffer
Yeah,
and
and
So,
suffer.
look, don't get me wrong, and thanks, Robin. I have nothing bad to say. The Rebel Legion wouldn't exist probably without the 501st.
yes.
And the 501st has done amazing things. I've trooped right along with them. I'm an honorary member of the Canadian 501st because for a long time I'd go up to the conventions and be a handler and just fix things and get things done when people were in costume and they couldn't. It's really the best of times. but I want to back up to something Jason said, and Chris, you mentioned part of the allure of Star Wars being timeless is Buck Rogers looks like the hair and the costumes, and Gil Gerard's collar looks
Yep.
like it came from the 70s. Look at that snowtrooper. What screams 70s or 80s on that? Nothing.
Nothing.
Like
Nothing.
you had the Rebel pilot costume had the tab collar. None of that screams 70s. Yes, you had some of the hair and the mustaches, but
yeah,
none of
Luke's hair is the only thing that screams 70s.
Right.
That's about it.
Yeah, and honestly, like Princess Leia's hair, you could have done that at any point in time if you know how to braid something. So
I was just talking to Jason the other day about this Darth Vader costume, right? That they wore. He showed me pictures of. They wore it to a party, right, Jason? And I looked at it and I'm like, if they would have done Darth Vader like this, it would have
had that cheesy 70s.
No. Yeah, it would have had that cheesy 70s. And it's surprising that this movie was made in the 70s and doesn't come across as cheesy and holds up with time. It's amazing how it has done that.
Like the Rebel Fleet Troopers is probably the closest thing to a real shirt other than Han that you have. Maybe Lando's and Lobot's, sleeves on their stuff, but even the Rebel Fleet Troopers, the guys that got blown up when they invaded the blockade runner, the Tantev, in the first one, the collars are small. Yeah. They're not like these big 70s.
They don't have those retro collars.
Yeah. And you're just like, how visionary is that to create something timeless is really unique. And I was 7 years old. Well, I was 8 years old when all this stuff came out, and really, I owe my imagination and actually I owe my love of sound and music to John Williams and George Lucas and Jason. That's right up your alley. But boy, like you guys said, all this stuff is timeless, and we're living in an age now where if you want it to be accurate, there's somebody that makes it accurate.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, there's been some pieces recently that I've acquired where if this was 10 years ago, I think the only way would be to either get it from auction or, to like a direct from source. And it's just one of those things where the community has grown in such a way, relationships have grown in such a way where, it's amazing the helping hand and the amount of time and research that has gone into things. And even like Chris with us, right? Getting into some of the studio skill things. And I think that's how me and Richard initially were kind of connecting and hit it off, was mentioning some studio skill stuff and discussing that, which we can talk about later. But even that, right? It's like, although we've reached a point where we can now look at things and be like, oh, this is this kit, that's that kit. Yeah, it took a long time to get there. But there was also a long time. There was also a lot of barrier to entry that almost forced us in that direction. And we've talked about this ad nauseum, so I don't want to be repetitive. But the point is, despite having to go that direction on our own, the areas where we didn't have to, it's amazing the amount of research and the amount of due diligence that was done previously that you're able to just access. It's almost like going to a library and pulling a book off the shelf, and it's right there. And
would you say a lot of that was the RPF?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a place to aggregate all the information. Right. But I think a lot of these people before the RPF, I mean, as a vintage collector, Chris, you remember early in the days, because I started off collecting vintage figures as well. Like, people would send self-addressed stamped envelopes. Yep. They would basically Xerox a copy of what they had. And we were talking about the backer cards too. Like, those used to be a dime a dozen when they found thousands of them. Now they're super expensive. So people were doing it on their own already. And then you have the RPF come and someone's like, hey, here's the place where we can take all this information and place it and sort of, cross promote and sort of collude together on like, well, I found this and you found that. Well, why don't we put them together and this makes this? And that's where a lot of, like, I think people who got halfway there but needed that extra, bit of help were able to find a counterpart to the person who was obsessing over the same piece or interested in the same thing. And that's amazing that the community has come together and it's like, hey, you like that? Well, I like that too. Hey, I'm working on this. Well, I'm working on that too. Look what I've come across. And then same thing like with yourself, Richard, doing the due diligence that you were doing at the time, having the interest that you had. It's like there's always that stepping stone that where we are today, as amazing as it is, I feel like we wouldn't have gotten to that place if it wasn't for all these. And that's, we talk about the secrecy and the frustrations and some of the relationships that have been hurt because everybody has egos and I did this and I did that. But at the end of the day, it took so many people, whether somebody did an hour of work versus 20 hours of work or found one piece versus 10 pieces. At the end of the day, one piece wouldn't be whole if it wasn't for the 5, 10, 15, 20 people to come together and
Everybody
make that happen.
Yep, everybody helped, and the aggregate it's a lot better than what we could all have done on our own. And you mentioned the barriers and the secrecy. I mean, if you're doing it for the right reasons, they're like, I have been given access to stuff all the time, and I can't send it out, and I won't send it out. And as recently as not even a month ago, I got an image to help me go after one of the helmets that nobody's ever painted because there's a lack of resource. And we mapped it, and I say we because my best friend happened to be here, and so I said, well, here's the image, but I didn't send it, and I'll never send it. But a lot of times the secrecy is because people are saying you can have this, but you can't share it, or you can have this, just be careful where it comes from because somebody's, you can bite the hand that feeds you. But it's amazing how sometimes people will say no up front, and then a week or two later, you get to message or a DM, and you're like, "Oh, that's exactly what I was looking for." You just have to be, and it makes all the difference in the world. And it's, I think everybody wants to help in whatever way they can, they will. But then there's also the side to that where people have helped time after time, and then everybody's just like, "Well, gimme, 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 gimme," and you're like,
That's a lesson lately that I've definitely grown a deeper respect for and have become less frustrated over. And I've even kind of had to put myself in a position to sort of like realize, okay, Jason, you need to be a little bit more patient. And it's one of those things where you have to respect why people are somewhat secret or guarded over certain things, because there are a few bad apples out there, and whether it has something to do with like recasting or taking somebody's work and financially, benefiting from that, those things do unfortunately happen. And it's a tough thing, it's a tough thing to deal with. But at the same time, I feel like there are some safeguards in place to help protect the community. But all in all, I think it's amazing. And I think a lot of the things also, as people who are into the found parts and the props that we take for granted, is if it wasn't for some of these earlier, the Rebel Legion, the 501st, these costuming guys that were trying to make outfits as accurate as possible, doing the research, that a lot of the stuff we wouldn't know or have. I mean, there's always this derivative of where it originated from.
Well, I remember looking at like the same photo, and over the course of 3 weeks, finding 4 different keys to the costume for a Hoth Rebel Trooper from the same photo. Yet you're looking at this photo going, I'm only looking to figure this one piece out. And then you go back and you're like, okay, figure that out. Oh man, look at that. And Trooping with Robin, very good point. It's just the more accurate, sadly, sadly, the costumes, the costumes that I want. So to go back to Jason's studio scale stuff, I want every Rebel pilot helmet from Jedi, and I want a studio scale model to accompany that: the B-wing, the A-wing, the Y-wing, and an X-wing. And I would love the costumes, but I don't think there's ever going to be a day where there's going to be a completely accurate A-wing, B-wing, and Y-wing pilot from Return of the Jedi ever. Unless somebody goes, hey, we have the whole costume. Do you want to replicate it? Or we've already replicated it. It goes on for sale, but it's like
not from head to toe. At least you're right there. Yeah.
Not from head to toe, and that's very frustrating. That's one of my big frustrations. Is like,
well, plus isn't there's multiple helmets? Like there's not just one.
Yeah, there's
Y-wing helmet. There's not one B-wing helmet.
Right. There's 4, and there's one with I think the A-wing has one with a visor. Well, you look at Chronicles, one had a visor, one didn't, and one became a B-wing pilot, and that's okay. Like, I get it. That I'm happy to have one. If I could have another one, just to have it repainted with the Minot.
That'd be cool.
That'd be cool.
We've been talking to Rob, and we've been trying to get that to happen.
Another run of I don't.
I would take any
This is sort of a
Y-wing
perfect
helmet.
example, guys.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That book's right behind me on this
Hold
bookshelf.
on,
And
I would take any Y-wing helmet painted. I don't care. I would take any of them.
Yeah.
But this is a perfect example, and even some of the Greeblies on these
They're all
change from
just
helmet
like-
to helmet.
Yeah.
We're like,
The chin Greebly on the ones that they came out with don't have the metal piece. Those other ones do. The A-wing, there's a B-wing with the visor. There's a B-wing without the visor.
Yeah.
And they're all accurate.
yeah. But
Yeah.
then if you have like a stormtrooper or a scout trooper, 90%, 95% of the time, they're all going to share, other than going from hero to stunt, they're all going to share pretty much the same Greeblies and parts that are on them. But you're right, a Y-wing, a B-wing, and A-wing may have different wires, different colors, different Greeblies, different
They all had
like,
different chest boxes. One was an amplifier for a car. One was. So it's. Yeah, I mean, that's. Those are the
Well,
things.
you want a helmet and then a studio scale model to accompany it for each one. Wow.
All the and I have the master replica snow speeder, so I'm going to be painting Zev Sineska's helmet, or I'm getting it painted, and that's, back in the day we didn't have Blu-ray, we didn't have DVD, and you couldn't take a screen grab. You still can't on certain things, but you could take a picture of whatever, and
VHS tape.
right, yeah, and you're like, every time you watched it, it got worse. So the ability to. You'll see when you guys come down, I can look at something at 13 feet wide and go, oh, that's what it is.
So I don't want to talk about anything else in this picture. I just want to know what Rebel helmet this is. I don't care about the rest of the picture. I want to know what Rebel helmet
Well, all right, you got me, because that's the one time I was like, I'm going to do my own paint job.
Okay. All right.
That's the super secret one. I could say that's an image that nobody's ever seen that we did that reference. Now, I liked Wes Jansen's helmet, but okay. I'm more Porkins. As you can see, if I just grew the goatee, I would be Porkins.
Okay.
That helmet's right over there if you really want me to bring it over.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. I was just trying to lead into this picture.
All right. Well, that's a really good segue. So
let's just talk about this.
Is that like a toe tag on George? What is that?
That is a Madame Tussauds tag.
No, it is not. Every year, so at the ILM Halloween party, every year they would give George Lucas the door prize for best lookalike.
Ah, that's funny. I like that. I didn't know that. That's clever. I dig that.
That is. So I believe that's the 2000 ILM Halloween party. That's my best friend Ken, who was a Royal Guard, and myself as a Rebel pilot. And you can see, like, that's the best I could do. It's got a Velcro name tag peeking out from the flak vest. That's not accurate. My mom sewed the thing across, so that's accurate. The flak vest was cloth. It didn't have ribs. But that was a Richie's Armor helmet, and it was like the third one he ever made. And the chest box and stuff. So you did what you could. And that was my first attempt at a costume ever. So, and that was in 2000. So at that same company I worked at, where I used to get all the headsets, our receptionist's son worked at Lucas Arts. And she sent him a picture of me in costume because we had a Halloween party on Halloween and I wore that. And he's like, hey, man, that's really awesome. Do you want to go to the ILM Halloween party with us? And
that's pretty cool.
The very first convention I ever went to was Dragon Con, literally like a month, not even 2 months before. And that's where I met my best friend, Ken. He's from Canada. And we met in an elevator quoting Twister lines because everybody was hungry and we're going, food. and you see the cows? So within a month of knowing him, I'm like, hey, and we could have a +1 because he was dating the art department director. So he's like, well, we're each other's +1. Bring somebody if you want. Now, at the time, everybody's holy grail, like the Mecca was Skywalker Ranch. Like if you could go there, people were, there's that movie of the guys that tried to get there and snuck in and whatever. Like that was the holy grail. Like who cares?
Yeah, it still is.
Costumes? Yeah.
Sort
if
of.
you could get there, you were like, that was your ticket,
Big
man.
niche.
You were famous. Yeah. And within a month of like making my first costume, my first convention, I got an invite to the ILM Halloween party. So Ken and I flew out to California. I had a buddy at Pixar, so we got to tour Pixar. And then the next day we toured Skywalker Ranch. Saw some like his collection of Alphonse Mucha posters and watercolor movie posters from France and Italy and all around the world. I was at Skywalker Sound. I mean, we went to everywhere. I still have. Anyway, let me talk about this picture. So the whole night, Mike was like, "Look, oops, I won't say his last name, but our host was like, look, George is going to come in, let him settle in for a while, and then if you can find him and say hello, find him and say hello." Most people don't because they're scared to, and we all have jobs. Just don't do anything that'll get us fired. So, after the first half hour, you walk in and, it's surreal because you're like, wait, that's him. That's George Lucas. And you'd see him in interviews. You've seen him in TV. You've seen him in, how many times you've seen him before you met him? Because we absorb everything we can read and watch about Star Wars. And when he's there, it's like, oh my gosh, that's him. He wears flannel. He's got the beard. That's him. So about an hour after the party, our host was like, go see if you can find him. And we couldn't find him anywhere. And as a joke, we were like looking under tables and stuff. And so we went back and we're like, did you find him? And we're like, nope. And he's like, well, turn around. And George was walking like 3 feet behind us. So I just kind of turned around and said, excuse me, Mr. Lucas. And I think he was like, mm-hmm. I said, I wanted to say thank you for Star Wars. It like made me be creative. And so thanks. And he's like, I don't even think he said anything. He turned and he nodded his head and walked away. And then later on in the night, we were talking to our host and he goes, so did you have a good time? And actually it was a really good party and the costumes were amazing. There was a Tommy, the train engine or tank engine that like the wheels went like this, smoke was coming out, the eyes would move because it's the ILM guys, right? It's their party. And you saw these, somebody had an ATST that was like, it was just really fun. And he goes, so what do you think? I go, I can't freaking believe we met George Lucas. And he goes, turn around, you're about to meet him again. And George had come up to us, Ken and myself, and I said, excuse me, Mr. Lucas, would you mind if I took a picture? And he nodded. So we took a picture. And then he looked my costume up and down. He looked Ken's costume up and down. And he nodded. And then he walked away. And it was funny because we're like, we didn't really catch the nuance of that. But then our host and his buddy and his girlfriend were all mad at us. We're like, why are you mad? And they're like, because we worked for him for X amount of years, and literally he either has his rubber stamp where it goes approved or rejected, or he walks in, looks it up, and goes and walks out. And that's all the praise. That's like literally him saying, "Great job, well done." And we've never seen that. We've never gotten it. And you two schmucks show up and in your costumes, and he's tickled pink. I'm like, funny way of showing it. He goes, no, for George, that's like he's ecstatic.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you didn't get much reaction out of him, but I guess that was a lot.
Literally but that's George. I mean, he's very understated and he's very intelligent, very creative, obviously. And so that was the night that picture was taken. The next morning, we went to Pier, whatever in San Francisco, and I remember we went to a 1-hour photo place. And that was probably the longest hour of our lives waiting to see if that picture would be developed.
Oh my God. If that thing,
to make sure it came out good and everything. Yeah.
That would be horrible if you went to meet him and it just didn't come out right.
It's a great image too. So thank God, because unlike digital cameras, you can just be like, it doesn't, or your phone, it doesn't look good.
Take it again. No, that was, I had like an old film camera with the big zoom lens. And I remember standing like 5 feet away trying to get like the focal just in case we were able to get a picture, and it just all worked out. And that
the lighting and everything looks great.
Yeah. So, it had a good flash, and I'll tell you, it's so this is 2000. So our claim to fame was, and of course when we went to the ranch, they have a gate pass, and we were like, can we keep the gate pass? And they're like, you're not supposed to, but if you don't give it back, there's a security gate when you go in, and you have to tell the guard who you're there to see, and your name has to be on a list. And of course, you go up Lucas Valley Road, and you're like, this is great. They named the road after him now. That was there before the ranch was. It's got nothing to do with him. But you go up there, and it's hilarious because it literally looks like a scene out of Jurassic Park. Like you're on Esled New Bar. And, I remember getting out of the car and walking up to the parking lot. It was like they're flocking this way. I mean, it's paradise, right? And here we are, two idiots that love Star Wars at where he works. So
I can't imagine. Like for me, like going to the archives would be like I mean, I couldn't imagine. Like that's my goal. I would love to see the archives, you know. But like to have George Lucas come up to you and talk to you and check out your costumes out, that's really awesome, dude. That's
I didn't really
something.
talk. I mean, he muttered
You talked.
stuff, but yeah,
You said something to him, but
right. And it was, my best friend picks on me because it's like you're like, deer in the headlights and Star Trek. But and what do you say to a guy who literally was the formative creator of everything that you love since you're 8 years old?
And probably millions of people want to actually meet him and talk to him.
Right. And so I said the simplest thing I could, which was thank you.
Yeah.
And
that probably meant a lot to him.
I mean, even people who work with this guy, I mean, there's people he's directing on film, and they're like, he don't talk. He doesn't say. I mean, he's a director. And we all joke the whole, faster and more intense. But even then, like whenever Carrie or even Harrison would, mimic him, they'd all do like, like the little whisper and mumble.
And that's actually really sounded like what he sounded like. So that's okay. So yes, that's the visitor pass that I stole.
Yeah.
I stole another one because I've been to the ranch 3 times.
Okay.
Actually did some work there. I had some stuff mixed by Skywalker Sound, a really genius engineer who's now with Dolby doing Atmos mixes. But it was cool because you sit in a stag theater, and the last time I was there, was it the last? Yeah, the last time I was there, we walked out of what we were doing, and Ben Burt is in the hallway swinging a Master Replica's lightsaber. And my friend Ryan was like, that's Ben Burt. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And he was so cool. He's like, I should have been here 20 minutes ago. George Lucas, you just missed George. We just wrapped all the sound for episode 3.
Oh, wow.
And so he's like, go take a look. So we went into the Stag Theater, and there, of course, they had whatever scene of episode 3. I think it was the credits playing. And that statue, so the Sistros statue right there, I actually went into the Stag Theater. There's one on the right side and one on the left side, and I got to go bing, and it's, I've touched that actual statue that was used in Palpatine's office. So it's
cool.
Yeah.
So what's this? This is
that is the menu. That's the date. The party was the 28th. We were there on the 27th, and they had amazing food. And I think, is there Chilean sea bass or something like that on there? Where's
black bean sandwiches, entrees, black bean tostada.
It was the second time they had Chilean sea bass, and it's like from Jurassic Park where they just stick their hand in the dino dung, and they're like, all right, so or they watch the velociraptors eat the cow, and they're like, who's hungry? And he's like, we have Chilean sea bass, and it happened to be on the menu, and I just thought that was funny. But that was a different time.
These are some damn low prices. Holy crap, $6.
Yeah, and it's all like they have professional chefs that sit there and cook for people.
Nice,
and it's awesome. So yeah, those are just and I have a Pixar like name tag, like who you're here to see, and we put the receptionist had such good handwriting. We made her do we had our visitor tag, and then we made her do new ones so that we could go see Woody. So I still have that, and Ken drinks Diet Coke, so he still has the original Diet Coke can from Pixar.
Is this your friend Ken? Ken Rice?
Yeah, there he is.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, I was. I mean, and you were too. So Ken is just like George Lucas. If he's excited, if he sees a movie he loves, he'll go, "That was quite good." And that's really like Ken being excited about something. So he can say what he wants, but
the type of guy that smirks and the person's like, "That's the biggest smile he's ever had."
Yeah, exactly. But there's no better best friend than Ken. But and we just the adventures we had were, and he's a big reason. There isn't anything he can't do. So he helped map out the Zev Sineska markings and stuff, and I collected all the research. I mapped it out, then he mapped it out, made a Photoshop thing for the painter, and even put together reference materials without the image. Well, that's good to know because thanks, Jason. And
Go ahead,
it's just
sorry. I'm just gonna go through some of the compliments
sure.
and that are on here. Go ahead.
Awesome. So really, so the magic of being at the ranch and walking in the white Victorian mansion that he works in. So the rules were, you could take a picture outside, but you have to be in the picture. You
Mhm.
have you cannot take a picture of anything inside the ranch, which was a shame because they had the AT-AT from Endor with like dirt and moss and stuff on its feet, and that was in a bookshelf in I think the main building. Um, and there was a lot of stuff you wanted to take a picture of. We did go in the library with the big stained glass, all the reclaimed redwood. What was interesting at the time was, but well, okay, before the library, we walk in the door and we hear what sounds like a waterfall, all this water running, and we're like, "What is that?" And so we peek our head, and there's a meeting room on the left hand side when you go in with big double doors. It's all wood. The place is beautiful, and we see this waterfall, and we're like, "That's not in Star Wars." Yet there's Anakin and there's Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, not Anakin. And it was they were showing Luke. We didn't even notice who was in the room, but it was Rick McCallum, Ben Burt, and I think George, and they were showing him the actual finished deleted scene of the waterfall where the Gungan sub loses power and they finally come up
Mm-hmm.
to the surface, and then the waterfall's dragging it to fall off the edge, and they use the Jedi harpoon tow cable to reel it in, and that was what we saw. And it was like we couldn't figure out if that was like episode 1 or episode 2 footage, but Qui-Gon was dead. Spoiler alert, if anybody hasn't seen it, that's your fault by now. But like you couldn't dream this stuff up. And then when we got to the library, they literally had like every single thing that they had, every article ever written, all these reference photos and books from the original trilogy. And what we were told at the time that was probably going to try to make its way on the DVD is like this encyclopedia of everything Star Wars. And Behind the Magic CD was amazing because it was the first time you really saw like the moon boot, AT-AT driver costume, and so,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of reference stuff that you just never seen before. So, and then we went to the employee shop and bought all the Lucasfilm stuff we could. And I remember going, Ken used to camp out for episode 1, 2, and 3, and going up to Toronto to camp out with them. And I wore like my Lucasfilm hat and a Lucasfilm t-shirt, a Lucasfilm jacket. And there were people that thought I was from Lucasfilm. I'm like, no, I just happened to go. I mean, you got to, like, I don't know if it's stolen valor or whatever and no disrespect to the people who served, but it was like, you kind of felt like a knuckle dragger after that. You just, so you learn like, okay, when you have the stuff, you have to be humble about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it was awesome. Like just the experience of being there was unreal.
I'm sure. That's crazy. That's a great story, man. That's awesome.
Those are good stories too, because like having those experiences to, tie into your passion and your love for something that, is so pivotal to the nostalgic aspect of growing up and the admiration for the movies and such. It really is, and it's I'm happy for you. It's great to be able to share these and have you share them with us. So I do appreciate it.
And that's where the drive to costume came from, especially for the Rebel Legion, and I know of course the 501st, and it's just like, now older, obviously quite older, still just as little hair, but now I can sit back and say, okay, of the advantages, the things that I want are now super accurate and they're available. I mean, that I did not get in the original run. I didn't even know the hyperdrive or you guys existed at that point, but I learned very quickly. You still need a little bit of luck, but I'll tell you, like, it's never been a better age for the original trilogy fans, those who grew up and those who were new, and even those who are not fans yet, but they will be. And look at the availability of stuff. Just Chris, your collection is freaking amazing.
Thanks.
How many arguments? Oh yeah, and by the way, the lampposts at Skywalker Ranch look kind of like the hull of the Slave One, but
Yeah.
we were told Slave One was not based on those lamps.
Yeah, they're just saying it's a coincidence.
It's just coincidence, yeah.
So
it's a strong coincidence, but
yeah, it's from a certain point of view, right?
Sorry, I'll be right back.
Okay. So Jason, earlier before you were talking about, Chris's collection is unreal. I have more than this, but it's what I could like easily put behind me in the most accessible place to do this episode. Somebody made a comment on the hyperdrive yesterday or the day before. I was like, oh man, my collection is really small. It's not that good. I don't, one thing I like about the hyperdrive, one thing I like about, reading through your stuff is there's no negative naysayers. Like if you like it, it's awesome. And everybody posts and everybody comments and everybody likes, and it's, we can all take accuracy into account in our own lives and what we want to go after: accuracy, screen used, actual found parts. But, I end up writing size matters not. And, Jason Eaton will tell you I've been after the X-Wing for, 10 years and I still haven't gotten one done. And now I'm in a position that I'll be moving forward with some of this stuff, but it doesn't matter whether you like Funko Pops or you like, $3,000 snowtrooper outfits. Go after what you want. Make sure, I'd caution people, make sure you have the money for it. Don't put yourself in debt.
We always say, it doesn't matter if it's a bookshelf and you have one bookshelf of a few things that you really love. Like you don't have to have a collection that's huge, like this is 30 some years of collecting. This isn't,
Yeah.
Well, that's a good one, Chris. That's something we try to tell people. Like this isn't overnight. This is, I mean, I only show my collection to the guys, but some of the things they've seen, I'm like, this is 20 plus years. This isn't something that's done overnight. But I do agree with you, Richard. I do feel like sometimes there's this pressure, especially for the younger guys that are coming into this, that one, they don't take into consideration that, wow, some people have been collecting for 5, 10, 15 years. But also, too, there's no right or wrong way to collect. Collect what you love. Collect what makes you happy. Yep. And there's no elitism. And we used to get sort of, when we started getting into like some of the Regal Robot stuff and lineage stuff, it was more out of curiosity and intrigue and just having fun and like really loving all the stuff that was becoming available at that particular time over the last 3 years. And people kind of took that the wrong way. And that isn't the case. I mean, I say to the guys all the time, if I'm in the city and I pop into a store, I'll buy a Black Series figure and I put them up on my desk and have fun with those. I got a couple Funko Pops and, there's no right or wrong way to collect. It's all about what you love and what makes you happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you have room for.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's going to get a point where I need either domicile so that the whole basement can be home theater and prop collection.
So what do you, you're not doing the Rebel Legion any longer, right? You're not part of the group.
No.
What do you collect and what are your interests right now?
So right now, well, really it's taking shape is I'm going after every Rebel pilot helmet from Jedi. I just bought a kit that somebody's going to assemble and paint for Zev Senesca. That'll go with my studio. Well, I don't know if the Snowspeeder studio scale or not for my Mar. But it's an amazing piece. So.
Jason?
What? No.
Is it the Snowspeeder? Is that that's not studio scale. The studio scale one's much larger, right?
Yeah. So
the MR one's right in between. So they have the small one that was gifted to the cast and crew, and the one that's a little bit larger.
Well, let's just say I want something that's accurate enough that it's unmistakable, and I would love to
the MR one's a beautiful piece. I actually just early in the year, mine went with the John Simmons, but
yeah. So I want I got in on the Wedge signed edition from Hyperdrive. So that'll be my New Hope with an X-Wing. The Snowspeeder will be with Zev's helmet. I have the Y-Wing, so I need a Y-Wing from Jedi. A-Wing, which Jason's going to help me out with, and I think the B-Wing at some point. And I know, hopefully, I asked the question to the guys at RS Prop Masters when they were on Instagram, ask us anything. I said, will you do an A-Wing helmet? And they're like, yes. So I just have to wait and hope I get in on the run on that. So really, studio scale models or models that are close enough to be like, yep, that's good enough.
Yep.
And strangely enough, I really used to want the costumes. Snow Troopers one I really want, but the busts really look awesome.
They're amazing.
Space savers, and it's the flavor of it without having to pay for all of it, and
Yep.
it's
Yep.
a lot easier to have.
Yep.
So, but honestly, my real holy grail would be to have one of every Rebel pilot costume as well.
That'd be cool.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I've had I had that as that Snow Trooper as a bust first, and then I bought the rest of it to make it a full size one. And I want more bust. I want an AT-AT bust.
Yep.
I want a Boba Fett bust. Those are the two that I want real bad. So yeah, I hear you. Busts are amazing without taking up so much space. Because I honestly I can't do another full size one like that. I just won't. It'll probably scare the shit out of my wife every time she comes down. So
there's a weird thing about busts. Like I think people recognize like a bust is almost cooler than having the real life size thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I think it's because like sometimes you see like the Iron Man statues, you know, they're not made of like metal, they're just wood. And I think we all are Solo Fett 72. And it's, I don't know, there's just this like recently I just saw, well, when I joined the hyperdrive, it kind of opened my eyes to like, okay, you know, I knew there were collectors, but I didn't know there were collectors. And every time I saw a bust, I was like, man, you know what? That's one way I could probably get around not having a complete head to toe Y-wing costume, B-wing costume, A-wing, because most of the chest pieces of the different fighter pilots are all found, and people know how to make relatively accurate, if not actual accurate, parts for it. And then you only have to have the bib and the green Rebel pilot. You don't have to have the straps and the hose and the different ejector leg straps and stuff. And so anyway, that's and then like the ultimate wish list would be like I do have a Meerkat AT-AT coming.
It's a Meerkat AT-AT? What's that? Yeah. I don't know that.
It's like a 3 foot tall AT-AT. He did a special run for the hyperdrive. That's where I kind of, it's not, I don't think it's any scale. It's not a studio scale, but I've always wanted a big AT-AT, and it was affordable.
Is that the one that like the ATST that Steve has, Jason?
From Miguel?
Miguel?
Yes.
I don't think it is. Okay. Oh, it is Miguel's. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is.
I thought you said Meerkat.
Or well, I forget who Hyperdrive just did it like 2 months ago.
Yeah, that's the Miguel run because we did one. Like sometimes we work on things it's you know, just for the sake of like convenience and logistics, we'll kind of do it behind. And you know, hats off to Christian that is able to manage that with such a large amount of group members, because that's, you know, there's you're putting out a pizza, you know, and there's only so many slices, but you have so many members that go after it. So, you know, that's one thing that we've yet to master. But yeah, we did it with Return of the Jedi ATSTs where we worked with him and had a batch go through. But Miguel, yeah, you're gonna be happy with that, Richard, because Miguel does amazing work. I actually got a crashed AT-AT from him about 2.5 years ago now, Chris.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while now.
You ordered it a while ago, but it recently showed up maybe a year ago.
Yeah, I got a year. I ordered about a year and a half during. It was during the pandemic, but then I had gotten it about a year and a half later, and then the ATSTs, and I think they did the run of the AT-ATs. But I think you're gonna be really happy with it. I think he does amazing work, and I think
Steve
yeah,
likes
it's
a
a beautiful piece.
Yeah,
Steve really is really happy with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, honestly, like I didn't really know much about costuming with, you know, the Rebels at all, but this was pretty fascinating to listen to and talk to you about. And listen, I tell Jason this all the time. I gotta stay away from found parts like the binoculars and stuff, because if I jump down that rabbit hole, I'll be in trouble. I go all in. I don't just dip my toe in. I go all in. And
It's frustrating.
Oh God, I have to keep my blinders on just to so. But I keep looking at these binoculars, and I'm like, oh, I can't do it. So, but I'll be honest with you, like I'd rather have something like that than a hot toy. Like I still have a lot of hot toys, you know, and like even statues. You know, I love all my statues I have now, but I'd rather get something like that and put it on a shelf with other like that Han Hoth. What is that called? Pardon my ignorance.
Oh,
But
the scanner, the hot
the
scanner.
scanner. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I'd rather have something like those two sitting on my shelf than a statue. You know, so
That's tough for me because I don't. You asked me what I want to collect, and at first, like, so I don't know, is it Sideshow that came out with the Rebel pilot Luke, and it looks unbelievable, and I'm like, am I gonna get like a Funko Pop, then the Sideshow statue of Luke, and then like the Rebel pilot costume, then the X-wing, and then this and that, and I'm just like, I have a bunch of Funko Pops. Actually, Ken got me two for Christmas to complete like the 40th anniversary. Darth Vader and the Snowtrooper, Chewie, like the ice windy Chewie going after
yeah,
the Probot,
yeah,
Han slicing the Tauntaun, Luke on his Tauntaun. I just got that one. That's Luke, like the old Amazon exclusive Luke, Hoth Luke.
yeah. You kind of went the opposite direction. Like you went from found parts to Funko Pops, whereas most people go from Funko Pops
Well,
to found parts.
and I'm pretty much done with the Funko Pops,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
now it's really going to be like busts and or the costume with the equivalent studio scale model. So
yeah.
Well, sometimes you when you start at that level, Chris. I remember when I first joined the show, when I first joined World War Six. It was basically just a Hot Toys show,
Yeah.
really, and then that's when I kind of came in and we started diversing it up, and Matt started getting really curious and into statues, and
Well, Matt
you
started it all basically by helmets. He went on the Innovos
yeah, the
website and
Anubis and
started
yeah,
looking at helmets, and that's where it spiraled
but
into everything.
but for a period, it was one of those things where the reason why I started watching the show and getting into Hot Toys is because I was at a point too where I had like the found parts saber and the MPP, and again, keep in mind though, these weren't $4, $5, $10,000 pieces. A decade ago, you can get these for a tenth of the price, and they're much more easier to come by. But you get to a point around like 2015, 2016, between EFX, MR was gone, EFX wasn't putting anything out. There wasn't anything to collect. I went to go see Rogue One, loved the movie, and then I bought myself a Hot Toy Short Trooper. It blew my hair back when I got it, and from there I spent the next couple of years buying nothing but pretty much Hot Toys. And then we started getting into what we got into, and everybody was kind of going into different directions, and cherry picking things that sparked their interest. And yeah, it is weird when you see somebody go from like, oh, you have like an actual screen used or production piece to getting maybe a Hot Toy or a Funko, but it does happen. I mean, 20 years of collecting, it's one of those things where I got into Hot Toys my 16th, 17th year in, where usually, like you said, most people start off there and go up.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it happens. It's interesting.
and I'm at a point in my life now where I can focus on getting some of the more expensive pieces and some of the bigger pieces. But it's the amount of stuff that's available that looks cool and is more accurate than what we had, is awesome today compared to what it was 20
Oh
years ago.
yeah,
And,
absolutely.
Even
and
10,
the one
even 10
thing,
years ago, yeah.
yeah, the one thing
Even
I'll say is that Lucasfilm really did a good job of not really correcting or overcorrecting the fans and the unlicensed stuff, because they figured out early on, unlike Paramount, it's really keeping Star Wars in the forefront of, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people's or millions
yeah,
mind. Like, you go to any convention, 501st, Rebel Legion, now the Mandos and everybody's, it's like free marketing. And I remember almost every customer is very aware and very respectful towards don't point your blasters at children. Don't, if you're a stormtrooper, you're not seen with your bucket off unless you're in a back room changing. Don't be an idiot in costume. Don't do things that would make, I remember, man, when we went to the first, I had to apply for the Rebel Legion table for Celebration 2. And you got an email, I think it was to Mary Franklin at the time. And first of all, having somebody at Lucasfilm's email was like, like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
But there was an application process. And I remember pages of why we should be allowed to have a table. Now, whether it was just an exercise and they were going to let you have it anyway, or whether they actually read them and said, you know what, they earned their right to be there because they did a good job on the essay, and we had pictures and stuff of troops. And
you had to write an essay even?
Oh yeah, they were.
Oh, geez.
Well,
I'd be out. That would be out the door. That would be no way. That wouldn't be me.
Yeah, but if you wanted your club to grow and you wanted to have credibility, that's what you did. And I don't know how easy it was for other people, but we took that so seriously. I took it very seriously. And I think because we did take it seriously, Lucasfilm has always taken the customers and the fans seriously. Now, I know there's arguments over recasting and licensed versus unlicensed and stuff like that. But if you look at Lucasfilm's somewhat, probably mostly hands off, I know some people got cease and desist, but they really let us thrive in a time when there was no real licensed way to get this collection or your collection, and that really has kept Star Wars alive for.
It really has. Now that you say it, I didn't really think of that before. Like I always just thought they were kind of like watching everybody, making sure that you didn't do that. But it makes sense that they let it go just to free advertising, basically.
Oh yeah, well, that was one of the things that we learned quickly from the 501st, and the 501st is really respectful of Lucasfilm, and I remember for any troop, and they invited us to a lot of stuff, and the Rebel Legion owes the 501st obviously, a big debt of gratitude, and I'd like to hope that they realize that even back then I was very appreciative of all the help they gave us, especially Elbin, so that we weren't seen as a threat, that we weren't seen as like riding their coattails. We did to some because they were first, and you had to do the things that they were doing to grow. But before every troop, at every con, before any event, we were sat down and we were told the rules. Point your blaster up, not at people. And in the beginning, you could let kids hold your blaster, but you weren't supposed to, no menacing poses. Don't take your helmets off. Don't do this. Don't do that. And you know what? Everybody's like, yeah, we were scared to death of the hammer dropping, but that goes to I think the Rose Bowl parade really solidified the importance of the community of customers to Lucasfilm. And that was a 501st event. I know a lot of my friends just celebrated that anniversary of being in that troop, where they had 200 or so 501st stormtroopers and different troopers with George Lucas at the Rose Bowl parade. And, it's just I don't know that there's any other franchise in the history of the world, not even Marvel, that does it, that has as many fans that,
not even close.
Yeah, that obsess.
Not even close.
Or Jason's in a career and I'm in a career that mine was largely based off the fact that I grew up listening to John Williams' Star Wars scores,
right.
And I designed high-end home theaters. Jason is a mix artist, and every single day we live out what George was trying to accomplish with an emotional connection to the audience. And Ken actually works with me to help design the stuff. And I'll tell you, we try to have an emotional connection in a theater before you even walk in, where George invented the TAP program and THX to say, we want a standard of audio excellence. Yeah, he looked at everything. He tried to make the movie-going experience an emotional connection to what you're watching better than anybody. And look at us all. I'm 51. Yeah. I don't know how old you guys are, but it's like I will never not have an emotional connection to Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely. So your first year that you guys the Rebel Legion showed up at the celebration was 2002.
That was our first celebration. I think we started. It says in the history it says it was in 2000. I really think we started in 2001 because we weren't ready yet to launch when Ken and I went to the ILM Halloween party, and that's kind of like the history. And I don't, whatever. Like, does it really matter?
Yeah, but I'm just saying because I was at both of those Indianapolis 2 and 3 celebrations as well. Those are the only two. Well, no, I just went to the Los Angeles one this year, but
I went to 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And actually, after 3, I was kind of like, that was one I had just stepped down from the Rebel Legion, and I was kind of burnt out.
Yeah, it can get to. I mean, honestly, I understand that because even this, you can get a little burned out on it. That's very true. But kind of keep going. So, we had a lot of comments and go through. I mean, there was a lot of talk. I'm just going back and I'm looking at all the different things. There's a lot of people who found this interview pretty damn interesting, and I'll admit I am also one of them. Like the found parts is getting to me. So
don't do it. Just don't.
I'm not.
And
I might
about that scanner is like there's 58 found parts on that thing, and if you don't get all of them, you're going to be like, it's still not as good as it should be. Dude, when I made my Hoth, I shouldn't say dude, but guys, when I made my Hoth costume, I bought the original V8 engine model kit, which was like $58 just to get 2 Greeblies from it, one for the Hoth communicator and one for the top of the backpack that looked like a pill. You know, those Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday pill things. If it just flipped off the flip top, it looked like that. Yeah. And you literally turn it upside down and put it on there and painted it. And I remember Dallas Pogue, genius, awesome dude, great creator, put the backpack together for me. And it was like, I remember Brandy and I were on the cover of Star Wars, or on the main page of StarWars.com for the costume contest. And Dallas was a snowtrooper. I was a Hoth Rebel and Brandy was Hoth Leia. And it was just, like the memories of that and the memories of, I'm proud of what the Rebel Legion's done. I'm proud of, the costumes are much better today simply because they have more of a focus on accuracy and because you have access to more accurate things. And it's if you need to hang out with the 501st and or the Rebel Legion at a convention and behind the scenes and just be a handler to see what these guys go through. Like Jason said, the guys and gals just put up with a lot of stuff just to make people happy. And you never see it. The work that the 501st has done for charity and the Rebel Legion has done for charity, like, visiting sick kids, going to hospitals, every convention, they raise money for Make-A-Wish or whatever local charity. And it's just, I think that's Lucasfilm kind of said, you know what, you guys are okay and you gals are okay. But there are some times when you're just like, you know what, it's just fun to costume.
Yeah.
You can just costume,
I have a newfound respect for it. That's for sure.
Somebody should invite you to one and just show you the behind the scenes stuff, because you're like, it takes 2 people to suit up a stormtrooper. It takes one to march with them to make sure people aren't in the way, or you can't see very well. I can't imagine what that snowtrooper's like.
Yeah, it was torture. It was torture. Yeah. It was torture. I think that's a good place to wrap. My internet is starting to take a shit. It always happens late at night. I got a call. My kids keep asking me, "Will you call Dad, please?" And I keep forgetting. They start slowing it down at the end of the night. But yeah, it was great having you on, Rich. This was a lot of fun, and we had a pretty good turnout.
Thank you for having me. And, can I do a quick plug? We're going to have a hyperdrive and Rogue 16 meeting sometime in April in Rochester. I have a high-end home theater that we can, if we have to do several showings, but we're going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. So if you want to, you can post on your boards and stuff. And I've made a post on hyperdrive, but I know you guys are coming down and it's going to be awesome to celebrate Jedi with everybody who wants to show up. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
that'll
Rich,
be a lot
and
of fun.
we can hash out the detail because I remember we were on the phone. We were trying to figure out like the accommodations of like depending on who comes, but
Yep.
we can post to both the Hyperdrive, Rogue 16, and then depending on how many people show interest, we'll go from there and try to determine what info to post and when. But yeah, we'll hash it out and we'll get that up there. But yeah, good plug. I hope people see that, and it's a fun little meetup. One for those who may not be able to make it over to the UK for celebration, and those of you who are like on this side of the east coast of the country because celebration taking place on the west coast. Beginning of the year or last year, I should say. It'd just be a fun time to have a couple guys meet up and talk shop and spend some time hanging out. So I think it was I think what Richard offered was a great idea. So looking forward to it.
thanks for having me, guys. I super appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Jason. Thanks everybody who showed up in the chat and kept it, a lot of questions and a lot of compliments. Yeah, Jason Holmes, Hyperdrive is a Facebook group. We are also Rogue 16 Facebook group. We are great buddies with everybody at the Hyperdrive. We're like brother and sister, or brother, I should say. But it's a lot of fun. Between we're actually going to be meeting up with a lot of them over in Celebration Europe. So we're all looking forward to that. So again, thanks again, Richard. I appreciate it, and we'll have you on again, definitely,
Awesome.
to talk some found parts probably too. So
No problem.
Just hang back a sec while we do the outro.
yeah, don't hang up. We'll just talk afterwards. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.